Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the
Hey.
podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited to chat with you today. So, I actually found you, I think, right, on some platform for podcast guests, and I saw what you do, and I thought this is a great topic for us to talk about in relation to networking and growing your business in social settings and things like that. And so, I'm really excited for you to share with the people that are listening what it is that you do.
Yes, thanks for reaching out. It is such an important topic, and I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, to be honest. Um, so I do life coaching, and how that came about is because I quit drinking about 4 years ago in May, and um, particular, like specifically talking to this topic of social situations and drinking. I was fortunate enough to quit drinking right at COVID. So I didn't miss out on anything. I didn't have to be like, oh my gosh, everybody's out. This is so hard. Nobody was out. But then once COVID started lifting, I was sort of like, I miss drinking. And then I had to think about it. And I was like, do I though? Do I? And then came to the conclusion, no, I don't miss the drinking. I miss the socializing, the meeting people, the getting out. So I did a deep dive into that, was really strategic, started going out, started doing these things little by little. Um, and I loved it eventually and was totally at ease with it. And that was one of the factors where I was like, I want to help other people be happy and sober because, it's a brave choice and you're a badass for doing it. And I just felt like I was in a place to help other people. So that's when I got my life coaching certificate and kind of did a deep dive into things around surrounding confidence. And so it's been a fabulous self growth journey. And even if I never coach another client, I've grown exponentially. And yeah, it's just been fabulous. And I am excited to talk about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think this is such a great topic for us to talk about. When I was preparing for the interview, I thought, are people going to think this is like a very random topic? Like, why are we all of a sudden talking about not drinking on a podcast that is supposed to be for female entrepreneurs? But one of the things that I talk about the most is networking and building your relationship through relationships with people, right? Networking happens
Mhm.
anywhere, not just at networking events, but anywhere that you're creating and building relationships with people. And I talk a lot about how like there's different types of networking events, and some of them are more like structured and we're doing an activity and here's the thing to talk about with these five people. But a lot of them are just like, hey, there's a happy hour tonight from 5 to 8. Come join us. And it's just, we just mingle and we drink and we have snacks and we talk to whoever. And I really love what you talk about because you talk a lot about the link between confidence and drinking, or confidence and not drinking. And I see that a lot in networking for people who feel really nervous about networking, or people like me who are uncomfortable at those kind of events. Like, I'm not the kind of person that's just going to walk up to a random group of people and be like, hi, I'm Melissa. But if I've had a few glasses of wine, I probably will. And so it's really interesting the work that you do around the link between those two things. And I want to make it clear that what we're talking about today and a lot of the work that you do, it's not, we're not talking about alcoholics. We're not talking about people with problem drinking behaviors necessarily. We're talking about people who just choose not to drink. And maybe they choose not to drink in certain situations. Maybe they choose not to drink ever, but for whatever reason, they're choosing not to drink when they're out in at these events or in these social situations. And I think a lot more people are making this choice nowadays. We see a lot more people, we see a lot more like bars and social places that are upping their mocktail assortments. It's not just like, okay, well, I'm either drinking or I guess I'll have some lemon in my water to be
Yeah.
fancy. Um, so do you feel like that's something that is happening more and more, you think, people not drinking, especially out in social situations?
It's 100% happening more. And just out of curiosity, before we met, I was thinking to myself, I wonder how many people don't drink because it does seem to be rising rapidly. And so the statistic I found was in 2023, 28% of Americans 21 and older don't drink. I thought that was a lot higher than I
Yeah,
would have.
for
So,
sure.
I mean, I know in my city, Minneapolis, we have two complete NA stores. If you walked in, you would think it was a liquor store, but it's all NA options. So it is definitely rising in popularity. And I think that makes it easier when I think a big thing people worry about and stress about is what happens when people say, why don't you drink? Like, what are you supposed to say? And what's your answer? And that was a huge one for me. And I know for other people, which I highly recommend practicing that beforehand so you don't get caught off guard and all of a sudden you're spilling your life story and you're like, why did I do that?
Right.
But it is a rising trend. So now when people ask that, you know, it used to be basically if you quit, you had a problem, but it's not like that anymore. So I think that's a good reminder when people are stressing out about thinking that they are different or sticking out from the crowd, and people don't care as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I have found people don't care if you drink or not. I thought they would, but they don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most of the time for me, when people ask why I don't drink, it's more out of curiosity than it is
Mm-hmm.
judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure which is more awkward, like when people ask, why don't you drink? Or when people don't ask because they just assume that you have a problem with alcohol and now they're like weird or like, well, is
Yeah.
it okay that I'm drinking? Like, I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
care. Do whatever you want. I'm just here
Yeah.
with my own choice. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you find people face in social settings when they're not drinking?
I think the lead up and getting out of our own heads and thinking that people care more than they do, not being prepared. I would say the first few times, don't wing it. Prepare your answer about when people say, why don't you drink? You know, you can just say, it's just not in my best interest anymore. It's just, I didn't want it to be a part of my life, or I decided in these settings, I'm not going to. And then follow up with the question. So there's not like the weird, awkward silence. Um, and so what was the question? Tell me that again.
The challenges that people face when not drinking
Oh,
in a
right.
social setting.
Yeah. And so I think basically the biggest challenge is getting out of our own head. Um, because people don't care if you drink or not. They really don't. And if they do, I found it's because they're grappling with their own kind of issues with alcohol, and that's not on you. But like I said, preparation, just go in, be strategic about it. The other thing that I found was when you don't drink, you more easily take on other people's energy. You don't have like sort of that fuzzy little barrier, and so the first couple of times I was like, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. Going out without drinking is exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized it's, you know, people are elevated, people are down, people are all this, and you're attuned to it because you're not drinking. And so I've made a conscious effort to put up an energy shield. When I go out, I protect my energy. And if I need to take a break and step away to recalibrate, if I need to leave a little early, that's fine. You just have to listen to yourself, and as you go, if you are exhausted the first couple times you do it, eventually you're not. Eventually it's like, okay, this is how I live my life. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in the beginning, I often left before anyone else because it's like
Yeah.
when people are on their first one or two drinks, it's like, okay, this is tolerable. Once we get into drinks like 3, 4, and 5, like the gap between the person not drinking and the person who's on drink 5
Mm-hmm.
has just become so big that it's like, this is not even fun anymore for me. I
Yeah.
think it's helpful too in the beginning. One of the things that I did, my line now is like, it's just not my thing. Like when people are like, why don't you drink? Why aren't you drinking? I'm like, it's just not my thing. But in the beginning, I would go with another friend who wasn't drinking very often. And that made it a little bit easier just because it wasn't like, I didn't feel like I was the one weirdo at the table who wasn't drinking, but also my friend knew like, this is what we're doing. And so it was helpful when somebody was like, well, why not? Well, don't you blah? And aren't you blah, blah, blah? For
Yeah.
my friend to be like, okay, let's talk about something else. You know, like I feel like there's always power in numbers in those kind of situations.
Yeah. That is very comforting.
Yeah.
And even if you go with someone that, if you can't find someone that doesn't drink, you go with a friend that is specifically there to support you and maybe you even have a little signal, like, or they can be attuned to if someone's asking you too many questions, they interject or.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you said about picking up on other people's energy. I never noticed that before, but now that you're saying it, it's totally true. Like
Mm-hmm.
you it's like they're all going into this like cave together, but you're like not going in the cave. You're like, it looks really different out here, y'all.
Yeah.
Um, so you talk a lot about this confidence toolbox. We talked about in this in the beginning, the link between confidence and drinking or not drinking. What are some of the tools that you recommend people have in their confidence toolbox if they're going to go out into these social settings and not drink?
I think the biggest thing is preparation. One thing I do that deflates my sort of nervous, I hate saying anxiety because when I say anxiety, it makes me feel like it's out of my control. But if I say nervousness or excitement, or then I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. Um, so if I start to think of all these situations, sometimes we think of potential situations that probably will never happen. I just cut it and you just say to yourself, I'm nervous about going into this without drinking. And then you say, so, okay, so what am I going to do about it? And then it just stops everything in its tracks. And it feels like it's more of a problem that you can address and solve and not something that's out of your control. So I
Yeah.
start with that. And then I always set my intention. Well, what is my intention going into this? Am I trying to make everyone my best friend? No. My intention is to, if it's strictly professional, my intention is to get my information out and learn from other people. We sort of get into our own world, but we learn from every situation from all these different people. So my intention is to learn and to share my information. Or if it's more of a social setting, my intention is to just have fun and conversate and learn about other people. So when you set your intention, if you start to veer off during, just remind yourself, well, my intention is just to have fun and learn about other people. And it's like, okay, do
Yeah.
that. And then definitely practice, just practice when, because the big thing that can throw you off is so why don't you drink? And
Yeah.
then afterwards, always reevaluating. How did it go? What made you feel comfortable? What made you feel uncomfortable? What do you feel like you handled really well? What do you feel, that maybe you didn't do so well that you could next time?
Yeah,
And as you know,
absolutely.
it just keeps getting easier and easier every time.
Yeah, for sure. That is true. One of the things that I tell people a lot when it comes to networking events in general is like find the ones that work for you. Find the ones that have the
Mhm.
people or the format or the place or whatever it is that like when you leave there, you're like, oh my gosh, that was so good. And notice when you go to the ones that you leave there and you're like, God, that was miserable. Or like my energy is completely drained. Like, what was it about that environment that made you feel that way? So, for example, like when you go to co-ed networking events, do you feel like you not drinking is more of a thing than when you go to all female events? Do you feel like it's more of a thing when you're going to, like for me, I think it is a lot more common of a question when I'm going to an event that's in the evening or at night than when I'm
Mhm.
going to like a networking meeting that meets for breakfast or like an afternoon tea, right? Like nobody's like, hey, why aren't you drinking at tea? Um, and also the setup, like some of them are very structured where it's like, okay, you're going to go to this table and talk to these 5 people about this topic for 5 minutes. Others are more just like, let's go and mingle. And sometimes when you're going and mingling, it's harder to not drink, either because you're nervous, because people are noticing more, because you're meeting more people, because of the environment, whatever it is. So like pay attention to the structures and the people and the setups that feel the best for you, where you feel the most relaxed and like you can be the most yourself without drinking and find more of those things.
Yes, 100%. And when you first start doing it, might look different than a year. Maybe a year from now, you don't care. You'll go to whatever. But in the beginning, I think that's being strategic is so important because it can be defeating if you go to one that really is uncomfortable and you walk away feeling like it wasn't your jam. You might think, oh my gosh, I can't do any of it. I can't do any of it without drinking. So really, I love that idea. Just picking the ones that speak to you, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. One of my first life coaches used to tell me, like, you have 2 choices here. You can either stay in the same circumstance and work on your thoughts, like change your thoughts so you feel differently and you have a different experience, or you can just not be in that circumstance anymore. And that is also a great choice, right? Like, we
Yes.
don't have to keep going to these evening cocktail hours where everyone is drinking and all the men are like, hey, why don't you smile more? You should have a drink. That was like every frat party I ever went to.
Yeah.
You don't have to keep going to those and be like, no, I'm white knuckling till this is comfortable. Like, why? Find one
Yeah.
that's more comfortable, go there.
Yeah. And when it aligns with you, you're more your authentic self. And so I feel like more connections will be made anyways.
Absolutely. Yep. You're speaking my language. So if people want to learn more about what you do, if they're interested in figuring out how to navigate some of these social situations without drinking, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, they could just call or text, shoot me a text, 612-440-8212. And we can just chat about their specific situation and how we can help that. And I have a website, sarahdice.com.
Awesome. I will put the link for your website in the show notes. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that I haven't asked you? Any words of wisdom that you have for people who might be listening who are considering not drinking or who are trying to do it either successfully or very challengingly?
I just remind yourself if you're navigating life or thinking about navigating life without drinking, that is one of the most badass things you can do. And you're brave for even thinking about it. And it's doable and it's fun and it's fabulous. So
Yes,
just
you're
find your
definitely not
support,
alone.
find your people.
You're in great company with Sarah and I. And there's lots of support out there. Sarah can help you. She's got all the resources. She's been through it herself. So definitely connect with her. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been great.
All right, thank you. It was fun.